I'm going to do something a bit lateral now, because we talked about this, and I'm going to talk about failure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, before we do, we should put it in context with Thompson.
I was commissioned to write a sketch show in the mid-80s, 85, 86.
Yeah.
And did so.
Yeah.
With lots of weeping and gnashing of teeth.
Yeah.
And it was, I suppose, a kind of signal, and perhaps the most important thing I ever did, because it was such a massive failure. And what is interesting and important about it is that after that I didn't write sketch comedy anymore. I never wrote another monologue, I never wrote another sketch. And I think that's quite tragic, actually. And it was a terrible experience, and I tell the story with great purpose, because I think if you can't fail like that, you can't do this job.
No, and there's an issue of resilience. There's a kind of trope, isn't there, that's to do with the combination of screenwriting as a negotiation with an industrial scale industry, and the resilience, which is probably genetic, that's required, because we were talking about that. I'll come back to it, because you've asked me to read a review, but I'm not going to do that yet, because I want to celebrate the series, and I think this is probably a moment to show the Victorian Mouse sketch.
Okay.
Shall we show it?
God, I hope you laugh.
Well, last Sunday, we were in the conservatory after dinner, John with his newspaper and I darning a sock, when suddenly he laid aside his newspaper and, pointing to something in his lap, said, "Do you know what this is?" Well, I leant over and was somewhat taken aback to see an organic object, the shape of a cigar, nestling up to him. But I leant over to examine it better, and whilst taking out my eyeglass, I fear my eyesight is weaker, Mamma, and remarked upon what an interesting-looking little object it was, whereupon, on my life, Mamma, it shrank into itself like a telescope before my very eyes. I confess I shrieked aloud.
How extraordinary. Augusta, do go to your room, dear.
No, I want to hear the story. Was it a creature from his laboratory?
Exactly as I thought, my dear. Perhaps he has brought home an experiment. But there it lay, utterly inert, looking for all the world like a small, pink, hairless mouse.
A mouse?
Shh! Go to your room, Augusta.
Was the mouse really dead?
I fear so, dear girl.
Can I make a shroud for the mouse?
Please let us drop the subject.
Has Papa got a mouse?
I really cannot recall. Yep.
So,
it's a sketch about a willy.
Sex and laughter.
Sex and laughter.
Sex and laughter, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you laughed. You didn't laugh out of pity, did you? Well, I don't care. I'll take it. I used to have violent arguments about the nature of comedy with my peers at the time, and particularly with Ben Elton, who was, "Em, you've got to have a joke, you've got to have a joke, you've got to have a punchline, you've got to have a punchline." And I said, I don't think you do have to have a punchline. I think you need a punchline when you're a boy, because men's jokes are essentially something that goes on and on, leading to an ejaculation at the end. And women's comedy is more circular. There are little laughs here, and then there's a big laugh, and then there's another little laugh. And so I think that our humorous, as it were, DNA goes hand in hand with our sexual, with our orgasmic natures,
yes.
You know, that men's goes...
I could talk about this for a long time.
And, yes, I didn't really express that very well, but anyway, never mind.
I want to move it on, because I want to get to Sense and Sensibility.
Okay.
And I want to talk about how that came to you.
Yeah.
And what you first did about suddenly being asked to to adapt a classic like that?
Okay, well, it came to me because of that sketch.
Yeah.
Because they actually showed that series in America. I think it was on at 3 o'clock in the morning or something on some obscure channel, you know, Iceland Today or something. But my great friend Lindsay Duran, who produced Dead Again, which was a film I made with Ken Branagh all those years ago, and Scott Frank, who's one of your...
one of our alumni.
She was watching it,
Yeah.
and she thought, that's the woman I want to adapt a Jane Austen novel. Go figure. So she said, would you like to adapt Sense and Sensibility? And I said, well, I think I'd prefer to adapt Persuasion. But, I mean, I've never adapted anything. Why would you... I don't know how. So she said, well, would you be interested? And I said, sure. I mean, I'll have a go. I will. I'll have a go. What'll I do? I'll go and ask Ruth Parvajavala, who's a very good screenwriter, what to do. And Ruth said, dramatise the whole book, and then see which bits work, and then take everything else away and try and make those bits. Then you have to write your bits.
Yes, because where do you begin and it end?
That's the trick, of course, because adaptation is both distillation and a kind of imaginative invention. That you have to use to create your own skeleton, because you can't put a whole novel onto the screen, it's not possible.
No.
So I sat outside, it was a nice summer, and I wrote the first draft and I adapted the whole thing, and it was about 600 pages long.
Yeah, quite long.
Long,
Quite long.
very long, it's quite a long book. And
120
it's very
pages being the
arcane.
norm, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then I started to... Because it's
Distill.
like I suppose with it, like a piece of sculpture, you know, that mound of paper, which is in there somewhere.
I love the fact that you've bought them.
I brought these are all the drafts of Sense and Sensibility, and this I think is the first one.
Yeah.
So this mound of paper is just the novel, more or less. It's all written on the back of old scripts. Everything in there is, and
then you wrote it by hand first.
Yes, I write everything by hand.
Yeah.
There's a few drafts there that are all handwritten. There's 17 drafts.
What I like about the box is that most people don't see that process. Most people, you know, you say to them you've done 17 drafts and they go, oh yeah, really? And it's all on your floppy disk or your hard drive.
Yeah.
That's actually a
that's a lot of work.
physicalisation of it, which I think is really good.
That's 5 years.
Yeah.
And not all the time. I mean, and what's interesting is as well that because I act too, there's one draft in there that I wrote while we were shooting Much Ado About Nothing, where everything's very Tuscan. There's a lot of olive oil in that
A lot of sunshine
draft.
suddenly, very sunny
I was
scenes.
just like, Eleanor leaps out of the shower, you know. Anyway, Lindsay said, you know, I do understand why this is so sun-soaked, but you have to throw the entire draft away and go back to the one before and work on that.
Yeah.
And that's what happens sometimes, and you just have to bite your tongue and go, OK, all right.
And Lindsay was your editor?
Well,
Or not?
yes, I call her my editor. She's... I think all writers, novelists, poets, everyone needs a good editor.
But I think the key thing, the key point that you're making, which is very, very important for people to understand, is that unless you're in a conversation with someone in the development stage of a screenplay, it's almost impossible to work through to the point of final draft, because it is a collaborative medium.
Yeah.
Eleanor, the character of Eleanor, what was the thing about her that drew you to her and that you wanted to kind of draw out in the screenplay? What was it about the nature of her emotionally in the piece that you were looking to kind of find and bring to the surface?
Well, it's an interesting book, Sense and Sensibility, because it's her first, as you know, and it's very arcane, the language. Harking back to the 1700s, late 1700s rather than the early 1800s, and so it's complex, but she's very, very simple. I mean, she's all about duty and honour, really. I mean, she is honour personified. And what was so interesting about finding Ang Lee as a director, because he wasn't famous then at all, was that he'd just written Eat, Drink, Man, Woman, which was all in Chinese and had one line in it where an older sister turns round to the younger sister and says, "What do you know of my heart?" which is exactly what Eleanor says to Marianne, and that we'd both written the same line in two different countries, separated by what? Well, clearly not very much.